The glowing screen of my phone mocked me, each pixel a tiny shard of the life I thought I had. "I'm not coming back. I've met someone better and already moved your things to storage." The words hung in the sterile kitchen air of our Minneapolis condo, 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. My wife, Elsie, was supposed to be halfway through a serene yoga retreat in Sedona. Instead, this text, followed by a screenshot of a bank transfer, $180,000, vanished from our joint savings into her personal account. I lowered the phone, the lukewarm coffee in my hand suddenly tasting like ash. 15 years of marriage dissolved in 2 sentences and a digital receipt. For months, the signs had been as subtle as whispers in a crowded room, yet glaringly obvious to me. Weekend wellness trips that stretched into full weeks, new flowing dresses that never saw the light of our living room, hushed phone calls that ceased the moment I entered a room. I noticed it all. My name is Patrick Sterling, and as a forensic financial analyst, spotting discrepancies isn't just a skill. It's my profession, my second nature. But I said nothing. Perhaps that was my first mistake. Or perhaps my first mistake was falling for someone who saw my career as nothing more than a tedious dance with spreadsheets and dull figures. I flipped open my laptop, navigating to a discrete email account Elsie didn't know existed. 3 notifications from my custom-built financial security system. Someone had attempted to change passwords on accounts Elsie had never even heard of. She was being thorough. I had to give her that. Picking up my phone, I typed out 2 words in reply, "Fair enough." Then I called my sister, Dr. Samantha Sterling. "Remember that contingency plan we brainstormed 5 years ago?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady when she answered. Samantha, a brilliant cybersecurity expert, had always been my intellectual confidante. "The one you called your apocalypse protocol?" She chuckled, then paused, sensing the shift in my tone. "It's not. Is it time, Patty?" "It is," I confirmed, gazing at the wedding photo on the wall, the only picture in the condo that still featured both of us, a testament to a love that had, apparently, calcified long ago. She just made her move. I ended the call, the image of our smiling faces a cruel irony. I should have noticed that, too. The gradual disappearance of us from our shared spaces. I met Elsie Steve at a University of Chicago alumni event. I was 42, fresh from a brief, unremarkable first marriage, and pouring all my energy into building my financial analysis practice. Elsie, 38, was a whirlwind of vibrant energy, ambitiously launching her holistic wellness brand, and utterly indifferent to the intricacies of my work. "I don't need to understand the details, darling," she'd say, waving a dismissive hand whenever I tried to explain a complex case, "as long as you make enough for us to live beautifully." We married after a year of whirlwind romance. I funded her entire wellness studio venture from my savings. When she craved a sprawling estate in a more exclusive neighborhood, I agreed. When she yearned for luxury electric vehicles and exotic spiritual retreats, I simply nodded and signed the checks. My father, Arthur Sterling, a gruff but astute carpenter, once offered a quiet warning as we were mending his backyard deck. He paused, hammer in hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Son," he'd said, his voice raspy, "I notice your wife has a taste for the finer things, paid for by your hard work. Just make sure she truly values what you do to earn it." I brushed him off then, but his words, laced with a wisdom I hadn't yet acquired, had clung to me like sawdust on a workbench. 6 years into our marriage, a quiet unease began to settle in. I started, discreetly, to restructure my assets. Nothing illegal, simply protective measures. I established 2 private investment firms, created offshore accounts for my international clientele, and diversified into digital currencies. Elsie knew about our joint checking and savings, but nothing beyond that. I watched as she became increasingly enmeshed in the world of energy healers and manifestation gurus. Her online following exploded into the tens of thousands. She embarked on extended journeys with her spiritual community, first weekends, then full weeks. "You wouldn't enjoy it, dearest," she'd purr. It's all transcendental meditation and vibrational alignment. Last Christmas, she genuinely forgot my birthday. When I gently reminded her the next day, she immediately bought me an exorbitantly priced vintage watch, excusing herself with, "I've just been so consumed with a studio expansion, manifesting abundance." I accepted the watch, but that very night, I meticulously finalized the paperwork on my contingency plan. The signs were all there. I just hadn't allowed myself to see the complete, devastating tableau. The morning after her text, I woke early and brewed coffee, the comforting ritual a lifeline in the wreckage of my world. Habits, it seemed, were harder to break than a marriage. I logged into my primary financial management system, a robust platform custom-built for my practice, but adapted for my personal finances. With a few swift keystrokes, I activated the Apollo protocol, the contingency plan Samantha and I had meticulously designed years earlier. First, I froze all joint accounts and credit cards. Then, I triggered a fraud alert on the $180,000 transfer, leveraging my extensive network within the banking world to expedite the process. I simultaneously dispatched comprehensive documentation proving financial misconduct to my attorney, Miss Evelyn Reed, along with unequivocal instructions to file for divorce immediately. Then I called my mother, Constance Sterling. "Elsie's left me," I stated, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. "She took a significant sum of money and cleared out my belongings while supposedly on her retreat." My mother was silent for a beat, her usual bustling energy replaced by a heavy stillness. "I'm sorry, Patrick," she finally said, her voice soft but firm. "But I can't say I'm surprised. What are you going to do?" "What I've been preparing to do for years, Mum," I replied, a cold resolve settling over me. "Protect what's mine." An hour later, my phone blazed with Elsie's name. I declined the call. 10 more calls followed in rapid succession, then a frantic text. "What the hell did you do?" "The money's gone and my cards don't work." I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to the storage facility listed in her text. Using the access code she'd sent, I located my unit. Inside, 2 modest boxes held my clothes and my laptop. The rest of my life family photos, cherished books, my father's old fishing tackle box, a lifetime of memories was conspicuously absent. It was then that something calcified within me. This wasn't merely about money anymore. This was about 15 years casually discarded, about someone believing they could simply erase me from my own existence. I pulled into a small, nondescript coffee shop and opened my laptop. Using the specialized financial databases available only to licensed investigators, I began digging into Damien Thorne, the enigmatic spiritual guide Elsie had been tagging in her recent social media posts, the someone better she'd so casually mentioned. What I unearthed confirmed my gravest suspicions. Damien's wellness empire was a house of cards, leveraged to the hilt, 3 maxed-out business credit cards, a lease he couldn't afford for his healing sanctuary, and, more alarmingly, Elsie had already co-signed on a luxury SUV loan with him 2 months prior. I closed my laptop. For the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The anger had dissipated, replaced by an ice-cold focus. Monday morning, I walked into my office as if nothing had happened. My assistant, Miss Jenkins, a meticulous woman in her late 50s, looked up, surprised. "Mr. Sterling, I thought you'd be taking time off." "Did you, Miss Jenkins?" I replied, a slight arch to my eyebrow. "Yes. Well, Miss Steve called here 3 times already." Sounded quite agitated. "Said there was a misunderstanding with your accounts and needed to reach you urgently." I nodded slowly. "If she calls again, Miss Jenkins, please direct her to my attorney, Miss Evelyn Reed." By noon, Elsie had escalated from phone calls to a personal appearance. Miss Jenkins buzzed my office. "Your wife is here, Mr. Sterling. She's quite insistent." I sighed and walked to the reception area. Elsie stood there, designer sunglasses perched jauntily on her head, her flowing linen outfit perfectly coordinated. She offered me the same radiant smile she'd wielded for 15 years whenever she desired something. "Patrick, darling, there's been a huge misunderstanding with the bank," she exclaimed, her voice just loud enough for the few other clients in the waiting area to overhear. "All our accounts are frozen." "Not a misunderstanding. Elsie," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, "you transferred money without authorization. The bank flagged it as fraud." Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "It was our joint account. I'm your wife." "You're my soon-to-be ex-wife who emptied our savings while simultaneously informing me you'd moved out and found someone new," I countered, my voice still low but firm. "That, Elsie, is textbook financial misconduct." Her voice dropped to a venomous hiss. "You cannot do this to me. I've already put deposits down on a new place. I've made commitments to Damien." "Yes, Elsie," I said, meeting her furious gaze. "I know all about those commitments." Her face went stark white. You're investigating me?" "Just protecting myself from fraud," I corrected. "I'll fight this," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "I deserve half of everything." I looked at her evenly. "Half of what's in those accounts? Certainly. But you seem to be under the impression that's all there is." She blinked, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "You'll find out in discovery," I said, then turned and walked back to my office, leaving her fuming in the reception area. That afternoon, an email landed in my inbox from Elsie's newly retained attorney, a terse missive demanding immediate access to all financial records and threatening to expose irregularities in my accounting practice if I didn't comply. It was an amateurish move, a bluster with no substance. I forwarded it to Miss Reed with a single, succinct instruction: proceed as planned. By evening, Elsie had rallied our mutual acquaintances to her side. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages, a chorus of voices asking why I was being so vindictive and controlling. Not one of them, I noted, questioned where she'd been for the past week, or with whom. Not one inquired about the substantial sum of money she'd absconded with. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I drove to the local community gym, not Elsie's glossy studio or Damien's flashy, healing sanctuary. I lifted weights until my arms trembled, then drove back to my hotel room. The trap, I realized, was slowly closing, but not around me. 3 days later, Miss Reed called. "Patrick, we found something interesting," she said, her voice tinged with professional curiosity. "Elsie has been siphoning money from your joint account for over a year. Small transfers at first, then larger ones." "To where?" I asked, though I already had a chilling suspicion. "Multiple accounts," she confirmed. "Some to her personal savings, but the vast majority to a business LLC registered to Damien Thorne. Almost $95,000 total, and she used your joint funds as the source." "Which means," I interjected, a cold fury building within me, "we can add financial infidelity to the divorce filing." "Precisely," Miss Reed replied. "We can also pursue criminal charges for forgery." I thanked her, the receiver feeling heavy in my hand. I wasn't surprised, not truly, but the official confirmation still felt like a punch to the gut. Elsie hadn't just left me for someone else. She'd been meticulously planning her exit for over a year, funding her new life and her new lover's failing enterprise with my money. That night, an unknown number texted me. "You need to back off. Elsie deserves better than you. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be." Damien Thorne, stepping directly into the fray. Interesting. I drove to my sister Samantha's house the next morning. Samantha, as a seasoned digital security analyst, was the perfect complement to my financial expertise. We'd collaborated on cases before, but this was different. This was personal. "I need everything you can find on Thorne Wellness LLC," I told her, settling into her home office. "Bank records, loan applications, credit history, everything." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "Legal channels only, right, Patty?" "Of course," I said. We're just connecting public dots faster than most people could. 3 hours later, we had our answer. Damien Thorne wasn't just in debt. He was spectacularly underwater. His polished social media persona, brimming with affirmations and images of effortless success, masked a business teetering on the brink of collapse. The new equipment, the expanded sanctuary, the lavish promotional events, all financed through dangerously high-interest loans and, more recently, Elsie's investments. But there was something else he couldn't possibly have known. "Look at this. Patty," Samantha said, pointing to her screen. "Thorne applied for a small business loan 4 months ago. Used the gym equipment as collateral. Standard stuff." "Yeah, but look who co-signed," I said, leaning closer, a knot forming in my stomach. The document clearly showed Elsie's signature on a $210,000 equipment loan. She had co-signed it before she left me. "Here's the kicker," Samantha continued, her voice grim. "The loan specifies joint responsibility with her spouse. They used your marital status to secure better terms." I stared at the screen, a cold rage blooming in my chest. "She put my assets on the hook for his loan without my knowledge?" "Exactly," Samantha confirmed. "And there's more. 3 credit cards, a luxury SUV lease, and the new commercial space rental all co-signed by Elsie, all leveraging your marital assets as security." I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, children played in the neighborhood park, their laughter echoing, blissfully unaware of the intricate adult complications of the world. "She has no idea what she's done," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And neither does he." The next morning, I met with Miss Reed and laid out everything we'd uncovered. "I want to move quickly," I told her, "before they realize what's truly happening." She reviewed the meticulously organized documents, her expression grim but impressed. "We'll file for emergency asset protection today," she confirmed. "The loan fraud alone is enough to freeze everything until the divorce is settled." That afternoon, I drove to Thorne Wellness. The sanctuary was sleek and aggressively modern, with generic motivational quotes painted on the walls and Damien Thorne's perfectly sculpted face plastered across the entrance. Inside, a scattering of 20-somethings in expensive workout gear took selfies between half-hearted sets. Damien spotted me immediately. He was taller in person than in his carefully curated photos, with the artificial tan and unnervingly perfect capped teeth of someone who'd built their entire career on superficial appearance. He strode over, hand extended, his smile perfectly calibrated. "You must be Patrick," he drawled, his voice a smooth, almost hypnotic baritone. "Elsie's mentioned you." "I'm sure she has," I replied, not bothering to take his offered hand. "We need to talk privately." His practiced smile faltered slightly, but he led me to his glass-walled office. It offered a panoramic view of his sanctuary, visible to everyone, yet soundproof. "What can I do for you?" he asked, closing the door and gesturing to a ridiculously oversized ergonomic chair. I ignored the chair, choosing to remain standing. I placed a slim folder on his pristine glass desk. "This," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, "is every financial document connecting you to Elsie. Loans, credit cards, leases all co-signed using our marital assets as security." He picked up the folder, his brow furrowing cautiously as he began to flip through the pages. "I don't understand." "It's simple, Damien," I explained, watching his face closely. "Elsie used our marriage, specifically my assets and income, to back your business loans. Now we're divorcing, and those guarantees are invalid." The color began to drain from his face as he absorbed the information. "These are all legitimate business arrangements between Elsie and me," he insisted, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Perhaps," I conceded, "but the banks approved them based on our combined assets and income. Assets she no longer has access to, because they've been frozen." He closed the folder, his eyes wide. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you," I replied. "I just thought you should know what's coming. The banks will be calling those loans due very, very soon. Elsie said you were wealthy, he stammered, his voice hardening, desperation creeping in. That money's not an issue for you. Money's never been the issue, I countered. Trust was. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. One more thing. When Elsie moved out, she took some items of sentimental value to me. Family photos, my father's watch things money can't replace. He stared at me for a long moment, his carefully constructed facade crumbling. I'll see what I can do. I nodded and left, the metallic tang of his fear almost palpable in the air. The very next day, a courier delivered a heavy box to my hotel. Inside were the missing photos, my father's watch, and other personal items all accounted for. No note was included, nor was one needed. That same afternoon, Miss Reed confirmed the emergency asset protection had been granted. All shared assets would remain frozen until the divorce was finalized. I logged into my financial management system and reviewed the alerts. Elsie had attempted to access our frozen accounts 17 times in the past 24 hours. She'd also tried, unsuccessfully, to open a new credit line using our condo as collateral. Denied. My phone lit up with her name again. This time, I answered. What have you done? She demanded, her voice raw and shaking. The bank called in Damien's loans, all of them. They're seizing the equipment tomorrow. That's unfortunate, I said calmly, the detached tone surprising even myself. This is vindictive. Patrick, you're destroying him to get back at me. I'm not doing anything to him, Elsie, I corrected, my voice flat. I'm simply protecting myself from fraud. You used our marriage to secure his loans without my knowledge or consent. That's illegal. We can work this out, she pleaded, her voice suddenly softening, a desperate attempt to rekindle the old manipulations. Come home, Patrick. We'll talk. 15 years of marriage, and she still believed I could be manipulated that easily. There's nothing to work out, I replied. The divorce will proceed. The fraud investigation will continue, and Damien will learn an expensive lesson about due diligence. I ended the call, and with a final, decisive tap, blocked her number. That night, I slept better than I had in months. 3 weeks later, I sat in a sterile conference room as Elsie and her attorney arrived for our court-ordered mediation. She looked tired, the designer outfit and carefully applied makeup unable to completely mask the strain etched on her face. Her attorney spoke first, his tone overly formal. My client is willing to be reasonable about the division of assets, despite the aggressive tactics employed thus far. Miss Reed smiled politely. That's good to hear, because there's been a development. She slid a document across the polished conference table. The bank has completed its fraud investigation. They've determined that Elsie forged Patrick's signature on multiple loan documents, using their marital assets as collateral without his knowledge. Elsie's attorney skimmed the document, his face paling with each passing line. We'll need time to review this. Of course, Miss Reed said, her voice deceptively mild. But you should know that the bank has already referred the matter to the district attorney. This meeting is a courtesy before criminal charges are filed. Elsie stared at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. Criminal charges? Patrick, you can't be serious. I met her gaze steadily. I didn't file the charges. Elsie, the bank did. That's what happens when you commit loan fraud. Her attorney whispered something urgently in her ear. She shook her head vehemently, then looked back at me, her face a mask of disbelief. If Miss Steve is willing to sign our proposed settlement agreement today, Miss Reed continued, her voice cutting through the silence, Patrick is prepared to provide a statement to the bank that could mitigate the criminal implications. He won't press charges for the theft of personal property or the unauthorized transfer from the joint account. I watched as Elsie's carefully constructed world collapsed around her. She had expected anger, perhaps jealousy, even begging. She hadn't, it was clear, expected consequences. "The settlement is generous," I said quietly, addressing her directly for the first time. "You keep your wellness studio, which was always profitable. You keep your car and personal belongings. You receive no alimony, and you assume full responsibility for the debts you incurred in my name." "And Damien?" she asked, her voice barely audible, a fragile whisper. "Mr. Thorne's financial issues are his own problem," Miss Reed replied. "But without your husband's assets backing those loans, I understand the bank has already begun repossession proceedings." Elsie signed the papers without further argument. As we left the conference room, she caught my arm, her touch hesitant. "I never thought you'd fight back like this," she said, her voice laced with a strange mix of resentment and grudging admiration. "You always just went along with everything." "That was my choice then, Elsie," I replied, pulling my arm gently away. "Just like this was your choice." I walked away without looking back. A month later, I moved out of the hotel and into a small, charming craftsman house near downtown Minneapolis. Nothing fancy, just a solid home with good bones that needed some work, the kind of project that would keep my hands busy and my mind occupied during the long evenings. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Elsie had relocated to Colorado, attempting to start over. Her social media now featured serene mountain views and inspirational quotes about new beginnings. Damien's healing sanctuary had been sold to a national chain, and he'd supposedly relocated to Miami to expand his brand. Neither of them, predictably, ever mentioned what had happened. People rarely advertised their failures. My sister, Samantha, stopped by one Saturday to help me install new cabinets in the kitchen. "Heard anything from Elsie?" she asked, as we measured for the hinges. "No," I said, fitting a drill bit into place, "and I don't expect to." "You know," she observed, wiping sawdust from her brow, "you could have taken her for everything. The fraud charges alone would have ensured that—" I shrugged. "What would be the point? She's no longer my problem." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of measuring, cutting, and mounting creating a meditative state. "I'm thinking of taking some time off," I said eventually. "Maybe drive up to the North Shore, do some fishing at the cabin." "Dad would like that," Samantha replied, a soft smile gracing her lips. "You haven't been there since he passed." That evening, after Samantha left, I sat on my back porch with a glass of good bourbon. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional distant dog bark or child's laugh breaking the silence. It was different from the upscale, manicured community Elsie had insisted on more real. Somehow, I thought about the last 15 years, how I'd allowed someone else to define my life, my worth, how I'd noticed the signs but chosen to ignore them, how, when the moment finally came, I'd been prepared because some deep, intuitive part of me had always known this day would arrive. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt free. The next morning, I called my office and told them I'd be taking 2 weeks off. Then I packed my truck, locked up the house, and headed north. No itinerary, no expectations, just the open road, and for the first time in years, no invisible ledger of resentments to balance,